past few minutes, a wave of confirmations has come in from European capitals. Several top leaders will join Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for his crucial meeting with US President Donald Trump at the White House on Monday. The meeting will be joined by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Apart from him, European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, French President Emmanuel Macron, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni all have now confirmed their presence at the DC meeting. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte will also attend. Von der Leyen has said in a post on X that she was joining the talks at the request of President Zelensky. The coordinated move appears aimed at preventing a repeat of the tense encounter Zelensky has faced during his last meeting with President Trump on February. By standing alongside President Zelensky, European leaders hope to signal unity and support and to reduce concerns in Kyiv and other European capitals that President Trump could pressure Ukraine into a peace deal with Russia on US terms. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Madhav Nalapad. He's the editorial director at TSG. Thank you, Madhav Nalapad, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, what's your reaction of the participation of all top European leaders in upcoming Ukraine's meeting? Do you think they couldn't trust Zelensky for getting a deal for Ukraine, or they couldn't trust Trump here?
Look, I think the question of trusting Zelensky, they trust him completely. I mean, they've shown it by the massive amounts of money they've been spending on the Ukraine war. But the fact is that they believe that by this kind of a united front, now in this, frankly, Giorgia Meloni is the odd person out. I'm not sure that she will agree wholeheartedly with the other three. Ursula von der Leyen and the other two have from the start been great supporters of this war on Russia. I mean, the war it began after Putin invaded Ukraine. But the reality is that I don't think President Trump is a person who likes pressure. And he will feel that these people are putting pressure on him. And that's why I think Sir Keir, that is the Prime Minister of the UK, has very wisely kept out of this. And as far as Giorgia Meloni is concerned, I don't think she's going to push President Trump too hard because she knows that the transatlantic relationship could be at risk. And Sir Keir of the UK has acted very wisely in not joining with this kind of an open attempt to pressurize Donald Trump to basically agreeing on Zelensky's terms, which are completely unacceptable to Putin. Now, terms is unacceptable to Putin, but the reality is he's not had an election for a very long time. And there should be an election now in Ukraine. With whatever land is there in Kyiv's control, they should have an election so that we can see how popular he is. He no longer can be called a popularly elected leader. He's basically a leader who has been overstaying his legal term. And I think this is a very open attempt to put pressure on Donald Trump to basically agree to the terms of Zelensky, which basically are totally opposed to any kind of territorial concession whatsoever. In fact, he's still absolutely adamant that he should get back those parts of Ukraine which were taken over by Russia since 2014, which Putin absolutely is not going to do. So quite frankly, and I think Donald Trump knows that, he's had a long meeting with President Putin, and I think that's a very good thing, because I don't think Russia should be pushed so hard that it goes completely into the China corner. India that way is valuable in that respect, because we are extremely friendly with Russia. But the reality is that Zelensky's terms are unacceptable, and the European leaders have got to save face with their own electorates. They spend so much money on this futile war that they don't want to publicly admit it's a futile war. So they're trying to push Trump into concessions that he knows are unacceptable to Putin. and therefore setting Trump up to be a failure in his efforts to bring peace to Ukraine, a peace that is acceptable to Russians as well. You can't have a peace conference with just one side, and that's what these European leaders have been doing. Peace conference after peace conference, with only Ukrainians taking part and not the Russians. So that's absurd. How do you make peace without both sides sitting at the table? So personally, I mean, I think it's a very open attempt at putting pressure on President Trump to basically toe the line of President Zelensky. And I don't think it will make him any more friendly to President Zelensky, to put it very mildly. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Nalapad, for sharing that. And given this history, again, of tense encounters between President Zelensky and President Putin, President Trump, what does this meeting suggest about the evolving dynamics between Ukraine and U.S. in particular?
Look, the U.S. is making a lot of money out of this war. The U.S. is supplying weapons paid for by basically by the European countries. There are vast amounts of money have been spent in Ukraine, and vast amounts of money are going to be spent in future. There was a time under Joe Biden when the U.S. was also spending a huge amount of money, although I think the Europeans are more or less matching. But today, the Americans are spending nothing, zilch. In fact, they're making tons of money by selling weapons to Ukraine, which Ukraine pays for by money it's received from Europe. So the dynamic, very frankly, with President Trump is very different from that under President Biden, who was one with the European leaders in trying to get Russia defeated. So the Trump is different. He's a bit more realistic, much more realistic in some respects, somewhat unrealistic, of course, in other respects. But the fact of the situation is that as far as President Zelensky is concerned, I don't think it'll melt the ice between him and President Trump, because any kind of pressure works very badly on President Trump. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Nalapad, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us.